Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 things that would happen if the minimum wage went to $15 everywhere. Number 10. The rise of the machines.
Forget Terminator, forget the Matrix. The real cause of the machine revolution lies not in military programs, but in the battle for a higher minimum wage. According to The Economist, there is only one likely outcome of a huge minimum wage hike: mass automation. Right now, machines and computers are capable of doing a heck of a lot that low-skilled humans can, such as driving trucks and manning checkouts. The reason they don't isn't due to some fancy-pants robot workers union, but because they simply cost too much. It's way more cost-effective for an employer to keep you working at a checkout for $7.50 an hour than it is for them to buy a machine to do your job, so they don't. But when that $15 wage hike comes in, suddenly the robots are looking a lot more attractive. The outcome? Jobs will disappear faster than you can say Skynet. Nationally, millions would be out of work. Globally, billions. That would mean completely restructuring our economies to deal with permanent mass unemployment, a shift which wouldn't come easy.
Number 9. The poor would still be poor.
It's important to note that robots still suck at certain jobs. Cleaning, for example, is being better done by humans. Mass automation wouldn't really affect such sectors. So that means a minimum wage hike would lift some people out of poverty, right? Sure, but it's far fewer than you'd think. Most supporters of the $15 minimum wage want to reduce poverty, but the minimum wage rarely affects those who are truly poor. Only 12.7% of US minimum wage workers come from poor households. Just under half are secondary income earners from households with earnings 3 times higher than the poverty line. In other words, they're teenagers starting their first job or parents who took time out for raising kids and now want to do a bit of part-time work to fill the empty hours. The result would be a boost to those people's finances for sure, but the vast majority of American poor either already make $15 but don't get enough hours or simply don't work at all. A mass-applied $15 minimum wouldn't affect this cohort one bit.
Number 8. Mass migration.
In the 1980s, well-meaning legislators accidentally screwed over Puerto Rico. As a US territory, the island became subject to the US minimum wage. Hooray for Puerto Rico, huh? Well, not so fast. The knock-on effect of this wage increase was to drive a huge chunk of the island's residents to migrate to mainland USA. This sounds counterintuitive, but it does make perfect sense. Puerto Rico is poor. There was simply no way that employers could afford the mainland's minimum wage. With automation in 1983 being a pipe dream, they simply laid off workers and sent unemployment skyrocketing. Something similar would happen with a global minimum wage. Rich cities and countries that could afford the $15 hit would suddenly become meccas for those from poor areas which couldn't afford it. The jobless poor would flood in from territories and rural areas that couldn't pay, leading to perhaps the greatest wave of human migration in history. As we all know, mass migration doesn't always go completely smoothly.
Number 7. Rampant xenophobia.
During the Great Depression, hundreds of thousands of Americans were forced to leave Dust Bowl states to look for work. Oklahoma alone lost nearly 500,000 of its population to more prosperous states like California. How did the residents of richer states react to this sudden influx of poor, depressed, and unemployed people? Well, they freaking hated their guts. Okies were the subject of extreme discrimination from locals who thought they were stealing jobs, bringing crime, undercutting wages, and just generally stinking up sunny California with their Okie ways. Never mind that most of the Okies were family folk who just wanted to do some honest work and contribute to California. Still, they were hugely unpopular. It's not hard to imagine something similar happening if a $15 minimum wage drove people from poor rural areas into rich urban ones. On a national scale, it would be uncomfortable. If it were global, then throw in racism and culture clash, and you're potentially sitting on a powder keg.
Number 6. Poor countries would become poorer.
Everyone reading this can probably agree that paying Bangladeshi workers 50 cents per hour to toil in a sweatshop is morally ugly. Unfortunately, it's also the way the world works. Poor countries like Bangladesh, Ethiopia, and Haiti are chronically in need of investment. To ensure companies want to set up shop there, they have to offer something the West can't. Sadly, that something is extremely low-wage employees. Create a world where everyone from a trucker in Arizona to a garment maker in Dhaka is worth $15 an hour, and you could destroy the only competitive advantage these countries have. For a company in the US, it suddenly makes no sense at all for them to set up a factory in Asia when it costs the same as setting one up in America, so they won't. Unless poor countries sacrifice something else in return for investment, that investment will simply dry up. Bangladeshi jobs will vanish, money will disappear, and poor countries will get even poorer.
Number 5. The end of outsourcing.
On the other hand, this would mean the end of outsourcing, a practice generally considered to be so mercenary it probably counts as one of the 7 deadly sins. While this is extremely bad news for those living in poorer countries, it could be pretty good for those living elsewhere. Right now, a lot of jobs that used to be done by Americans are being done abroad for a fraction of the cost. Take away those cost incentives to move abroad, and those jobs will probably stay in America, provided the government did other stuff like cut corporation tax. For those industries that can't be automated, it could result in a glut of work available at home. It would be the same thing that both Trump and Bernie Sanders like to talk about: American jobs for American workers. The downside is there are other ways countries could attract multinationals even with a global $15 minimum wage, such as low corporation tax, an unregulated market, or removing certain labor restrictions. In practice, a global minimum wage of $15 might not end outsourcing. Instead, it might trigger a race to the bottom in an entirely different area.
Number 4. A gigantic small business crash.
There's a reason campaigns like Fight for $15 stir so much moral fury. The idea that a multi-billion-dollar empire like Walmart can get away with paying its employees $7.20 per hour makes any reasonable person's blood boil. The reality is that plenty of minimum wage employees aren't slaving away in Walmart, they're working for small businesses. And asking those small businesses to double their employees' wages is like asking them to start handing out blocks of gold to all their customers. Around a third of minimum wage employees are working at businesses that employ fewer than 50 people. Force a $15 minimum wage on these places and they're going to go under or lay off staff, or more likely both. That means a collapse of small businesses across the board, something that's not exactly thrilling for stuff like innovation, the economy, or just having a few more choices of coffee place beyond Starbucks. Most of us value small businesses and independent mom-and-pop stores. We also value the idea of workers being paid a good minimum wage. Sadly, these two things can often be mutually exclusive.
Number 3. The rise of freelance contract work.
One of the big flaws with the minimum wage is that there are quite a few ways around it. Most of you watching this probably work in an industry that utilizes one or more of them. For example, your place of work might take on unpaid interns over the summer, or maybe those looking for a promotion can take part in a scheme that temporarily increases their responsibilities while not affecting their pay scale. In many industries, the get-around comes from freelance contract work. This is especially prevalent in the world of online writing. The basic setup is that the website will pay you per article, not per hour worked. If you're capable of writing a $15 article in under an hour, then that's great, but for someone without those skills, then, well, you've got a problem. In a world where $15 is everywhere, plenty of companies are going to avail themselves of freelance contracts. This means people who aren't suited to them languishing away, taking hours and hours and hours to complete a task which will net them only paltry sums. So how about we get rid of those contracts altogether? Well, then you're stuck with plenty of businesses going bust and all those same workers now making nothing at all.
Number 2. An explosion of spending.
By now, we suspect some Fight for 15 fans are more than a little upset with the direction that this video has taken, but hey, we just go out and do our research and this is where it led us. As for this entry, it has led to a potential light at the end of this dark and mold-infested tunnel. There's a chance that a $15 minimum wage could spark an economy-reviving spending spree. This comes courtesy of Bloomberg, an outfit not exactly known for its leftish politics. The argument is pretty straightforward. The capitalist economy relies upon workers using their wages to buy stuff they want but don't really need. This is the engine that drives growth. Whisk away that extra part of their paycheck marked conspicuous consumption, and the economy falters. Conversely, inflate that part wildly with a $15 minimum wage and sit back and watch as the economy goes into overdrive. The theory is that people who earn the extra money would spend and spend like lunatics. Goods would be flying off shelves, vacations would be booked en masse, services would be purchased, money would go flying through the economy, and everyone would wind up being a winner. It could be a boom to rival the 2008 bust, this sort of massive boost that we haven't seen in ages.
Number 1. Everything or nothing.
At the end of all that, we have a confession to make. We don't know what would happen if the minimum wage went to $15 everywhere. That's not us being uninformed, literally nobody knows. While there have been plenty of studies done on minimum wage hikes, there has never been one done on a hike as enormous as the $15 one would be. It simply hasn't happened before over a large enough area or in enough places for anyone to draw any firm conclusions. As a result, it's easy to find respected economics writers claiming that a national $15 minimum would be the best thing ever, just as it's easy to find respected writers claiming that such a hike would trigger the apocalypse. What we've done in this video is drawn on what a plurality of economists seem to think, and what theories seem to suggest to try and draw conclusions. The reality is, no one knows for sure what would happen applying the minimum wage on a national scale, let alone an international one. The only certainty is that the effect would be enormous and possibly world-changing. Whether for the better or the worse is something we'd simply have to wait to find out.
So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do give us a like below and don't forget to subscribe. You can do that on the screen or with the button below this video. And if you enjoyed this video, why not check out some of our other videos that are over there on the right. One is the top 10 underhanded moves by corporations, and below that we've got the top 10 big myths about US politics that you probably believe. So be sure to check those out, be sure to thumbs up and subscribe, and thank you for watching.